On April 23, 1934, in the central prison of the U.S. state of Arizona, the door to the police room swung open. A prisoner in a striped uniform entered, holding a strangely shaped gun. A smile played on his lips, emitting an air of mystery and confidence. He calmly addressed them. "According to the law, you must protect me from any danger. If I end my life or shoot any of you, you will be held responsible. Without your negligence and dereliction of duty, a prisoner like me wouldn't have obtained a weapon like this and escaped his cell. But that's not the issue right now. This weapon can fire 10 shots at the push of a button. All I want is cooperation and calmness. I don't want to kill anyone. Just to get out of prison, let's head for the back door quietly." The police, stunned by what they saw, remained motionless. The weapon was unlike anything they had ever seen, strange and mysterious. The prisoner spoke calmly, confidently, and with a smile, as if they were the prisoners and he was the policeman. He approached them and took one of the officer's guns from the table. "Take off your clothes and give them to me," he said to another officer. The policeman did as he was told, handing over his clothes before walking out the door. The prisoner locked the door, changed into the officer's clothes, and returned shortly after. He opened the door and addressed a specific officer named Finn. "You're coming with me." He shut the door behind them, then turned to the remaining officer and said, "Make sure no one knows what happened. I don't want to kill anyone. Like I said before, I just want to escape, not kill anyone with this gun." The prisoner passed through the guard's gate with the policeman, laughing and being cheerful with everyone who saw him. Although no one knew him, he had the demeanor of an experienced security professional. Once outside, they walked for 20 minutes. The prisoner hailed a taxi. Before the car drove off, he threw the mysterious weapon out the window and said to the policeman, "This is a gift from me to you." The policeman approached and took the weapon, and to his surprise, it was a very primitively carved piece of wood in the shape of a gun, painted with asphalt to show its black color. The weapon was engraved with the policeman's names and the inscription, "Love, John Dillinger." This is one of the stories of one of the most mysterious criminals of the 20th century. Today, I'm going to tell you the story of John Dillinger, one of the most brilliant and skillful thieves in 20th century history. Despite his short life, Dillinger was famous for 3 things. Escaping from prison. Dillinger managed to escape from prison twice, making him a symbol of rebellion against authority. Robbing banks. Dillinger robbed several banks during the Great Depression, making him a folk hero to some people who saw him as a hero resisting economic injustice. Killing cops. Dillinger killed several police officers during his criminal career, making him a prime target for the FBI. On June 22, 1903, on the outskirts of Indianapolis, Indiana, John Herbert Dillinger was born. His father, John Dillinger Sr., owned a small grocery store and was very strict with his son. When John was 3 years old, his mother died, and he was raised by his aunt. When John was 9 years old, his father remarried and left him to work and sleep in the grocery store. John would go to school in the morning and then continue working at the grocery store in the afternoon. John's behavior was bad, and he was expelled from several schools. His father only dealt with this by beating him. According to sources, John's father only hugged him or treated him kindly once in his life. He was very harsh with him, and this is what made his behavior generally bad. When John was 14 years old, he dropped out of school after being expelled and went to work with his father. 2 years later, in 1924, he had a disagreement with his father, hit his father, ran away from the grocery store, and went to Indianapolis. There, the story of John Dillinger as one of the most famous thieves in history began. John was enchanted by the beauty of the city, but he only had a small amount of money that he stole from his father's safe a few days before the dispute between them increased. John was working with his father, but after the dispute, he was forced to look for a new job. John only found work in a shoe shop. He worked during the day and spent his money in nightclubs. He got to the point where he didn't have enough to buy food and drink. There was a grocery store near his workplace, and John would go there to steal food. John was a juggler, and he was able to steal anything quickly without anyone noticing. He always wore a shirt with wide sleeves so he could hide what he was stealing inside. He would go to the grocery store every day, sit and talk to the store owner, while stealing anything he saw in front of him and hiding it in the sleeve of his shirt. John would steal his breakfast and lunch from the grocery store next door. Afterward, he would quietly go back to work as if nothing had happened. This went on for 4 months. John worked by day and stayed up late at night, and on his days off, he wandered the streets of the city, mesmerized by its beauty. During this time, his father searched for him in vain. Finally, he found him and embraced him tenderly for the first time in his life. This was the first and only hug John received from his father. John realized that he needed his father's affection and decided to return with him to the countryside. John lived with his father on a farm far from the city, away from its temptations. John had saved some money from his work in the workshop. He expected to fall out with his father again, so he planned to return to the city. But this time, the money wasn't from his work but from the materials he stole from the workshop and sold. John stayed with his father on the farm until he received a letter from the grocery store owner. The grocer wrote, "Hey, John. I noticed you from day one. I could see you stealing things and hiding them in your sleeve, but I liked you a lot. I didn't expose you because I admired your speed and your ability to hide things. I was impressed with how you kept your cool while stealing. You evolved so much day by day that I no longer noticed anything about you. You are an artist and a genius, but I advise you to channel your abilities into something useful. I'm sure you will succeed in whatever field you choose." John was surprised by the letter and decided to return to the city. There, he discovered his talent and started working in many fields. Only 2 months after his return, he went back to the grocer, apologized, and promised to compensate him for what he had stolen. The grocer forgave John and advised him to put his abilities to good use. John tried working in many fields, such as circuses, money changers, and banks, but he was not accepted. Finally, he found a job in a nightclub, where he showed his creativity and skills. At the age of 17, John's life changed drastically. He went from a thief to a creative and industrious person. John was no ordinary person. He had an exceptional ability to shuffle cards and cheat. He could determine the winner of a game before it started, which made him a target for crooks who sought to collaborate with him in exchange for large commissions. This was the case for 2 years, during which time he amassed a fortune. In return, he paid off his debts to the grocery store owner who had discovered his talent. But John's luck didn't last. At one point, his cheating was exposed by a gang member. The gang member promised him death if they met again, but later turned out to be one of his closest friends. After his cheating was exposed, John ran away in search of a new job. He tried to avoid gambling parlors for fear of meeting the gang member, so he worked at a pool hall. There, he met Ted, a loser like himself. The two agreed to rob a supermarket, but their plan failed, and they were arrested. John was supposed to be sentenced to 2 years in prison. When his father found out, he came to support him. The father suggested that John claim to the judge that he was a member of a gang that forced him to steal at gunpoint, thinking that this would reduce the sentence. The opposite happened. John's confession made him guilty of criminal involvement due to gang membership, resulting in the sentence being increased from 2 years to 14 years. The news that John had been sentenced to 14 years in prison was a devastating blow. He had no choice but to give up and spend the time in prison. It got worse when he faced the person who had threatened to kill him once he was in prison. But over time, this person turned out to be one of John's closest friends. As the days went by, John became the leader of the most powerful gang inside the prison. He charged tributes to the prisoners, and he and his men had their own niche. It was as if he entered prison to develop his talents and prepare for the next phase of his life. After 6 years of incarceration, John studied everything inside the prison. From the guards to their shifts, he even studied how they behaved during their shifts. Most importantly, he drew an imaginary map of the prison and was able to determine the best place to escape. After 2 years of research and planning, he discovered that the weakest point in the prison was the laundry room. From there, he and his gang could escape. The reason for this was that there were water pipes coming directly from the basement. If he could disconnect it and dig around it, he would be able to simply go down into the basement or the space between the prison and the sewers. From there, he could access the sewers and exit to anywhere in the city. John devised an elaborate plan and designed it to the best of his ability. He assigned tasks to the gang members, but something unexpected happened that changed the entire plan. A week before the execution of the plan, John was summoned to the detective's office. They told him that his parole application had been accepted and that he would be free from tomorrow. This news did not make John happy at all. It meant that the plans were no longer necessary. During the interrogation, one of the detectives asked John to see the papers he had with him. John had to give them to them. When the detective saw the drawings, he thought it was an escape plan. But John laughed calmly and coolly and told him that he was writing a detective novel and turning it into a movie. He said he couldn't write, so he was sketching the events instead. After a discussion, the police and detectives were convinced that there was nothing serious in these papers. The next day, John was released from prison. But what happened was that the plan, which was so meticulously and carefully laid out, even if John wasn't there, his men executed it. Indeed, just 1 month after John got out, all of his men escaped from the prison. They bribed the policeman in charge of assigning tasks to prisoners and asked him to assign them as many days as possible to work in the laundry room. Although the department didn't need more than 8 people to work there, the policeman put the names of John's men, 14 of them. There, they dismantled a washing machine, 4 of them digging underneath it and enlarging the hole around the pipes. It opened up to 70 centimeters below the sewer. Each time they entered the laundry department, they took turns unscrewing the pipes and digging under the washing machine. At the end of the shift, they would put everything back and walk out without anyone noticing. Within 4 weeks, the hole was ready for them to come out. One night, they snuck into the laundry room and exited through the hole. The next day, at 3 p.m., they saw sunlight outside the prison for the first time in years. As soon as they got out, they met John, who had prepared everything for them. He showed them the new headquarters he had rented, which was a basement in a gang-infested neighborhood. Even the police in this neighborhood were corrupt, as they were helping the gangs deal in illegal substances. Forgetting the grocer's advice, John set out and put all his energies into robbing banks. The first robbery they pulled off was in 1933. Just 2 months after they got out of prison, they walked into the bank wearing suits. They had a motorcade of black cars, with John leading the way with 3 of his friends. John walked up to the bank manager and said, "We are from the Secret Service, and we are required to move the money from this bank to the Federal Reserve Bank vault immediately, because there is a possibility that this bank will be bombed. We don't have enough information, and we don't know why this bank is being targeted. Please cooperate with us to empty the vault quickly, and let us take all measures to protect everyone." John was so convincing that everyone believed him without the bank management contacting the police. Of course, John had prepared for everything. At the time, the gang numbered 22 people, all of whom carried fake security IDs. They had submachine guns and pistols, and among their weapons were 8 plastic toy machine guns. They were on a tight budget and didn't have enough to buy weapons for everyone. The important thing is that everyone was convinced, and the staff helped John and his men. Everything looked real, but as soon as the safe was opened and the money started moving, 2 of John's men smiled. One of the employees took notice and wanted to leave the place because he wondered how 2 intelligence agents could smile while transferring money. Their laughter signaled that things had gone as planned. At that moment, John loudly shouted out a pre-agreed word, Plan B. Plan B meant to capture the employees and attempt to exit through the back door with as much money as possible. Indeed, John and his men managed to escape after a chase and clash with the police. As a result, 2 of his men died, but the plan worked, and they stole a tidy sum. After this operation, John had an old vendetta waiting for him. The vendetta was with the supermarket where he was first arrested and for which he was imprisoned for 3 years. John simply went to the supermarket with all his gang members. They entered with their guns, surrounded the place, and stole the safe. He had brought a large pickup truck with him, and they unloaded all the shelves into it. The way he treated the supermarket employees was very barbaric. In the end, he left a note for the supermarket owner saying, "If you had let me take a little back then, I wouldn't have come today and robbed the whole supermarket." After he left, John went to the slums and distributed all the things he had stolen to the homeless. He promised everyone that he would always distribute things like this to them, but in return, he wanted them to be ready for any operation that required it. It was time for the poor to rise up against the corrupt rich. Indeed, John Dillinger became a hero, because he repeated this distribution to the homeless more than 10 times. After 6 months of distributing aid to the homeless, John decided to fight the police because they were the reason he lost his freedom and was denied a decent life outside of prison. He asked the homeless to carry out attacks on the police, promising a reward of $200 for anyone who killed a policeman and escaped without being caught and providing proof of the killing. Indeed, more than 20 policemen were killed in just 1 week. Strangely, all the crimes against the police were recorded anonymously, meaning they were not documented, and no one considered it a strange event needing attention. Of course, this happened because the killers were unpredictable. The police were killed in disparate places, and the methods of killing were varied and numerous, leaving the police unsure of how to respond. John's goal with this movement was to discourage people from joining the police force. However, his plan didn't last more than 2 weeks, because several homeless individuals were killed while attempting to carry out attacks on the police. This became a threat to his reputation and to the people he loved and grew up with. For these reasons, he stopped the reward and canceled the whole thing. John sat down to plan a new robbery, smarter and stranger than the previous ones. It was the first of its kind in history. John decided to play the game differently. Instead of resorting to guns and terrorizing people or impersonating cops to rob banks, let's approach this differently, he said. Let's target people's money from checks. The plan unfolded as follows. John, accompanied by one of his gang members, visited a bank. He conversed with the bank manager, claiming to work for the Census Bureau of the city center. "I need the details of major customers," he informed them. "We're not interested in their balance. We just need their names and addresses. We'll take care of the rest of the procedures to identify suspicious transactions, merely as a security measure." John gathered the names of numerous customers from the bank. The plan worked, and he replicated it in second, third, and fourth banks, subsequently monitoring these account holders. After setting their targets, he and his team embarked on executing the plan within a single day. They divided themselves into multiple teams, each comprising 3 individuals. Their objective was to enter the homes of targeted individuals, detain them, and coerce them into writing checks for substantial amounts. In the span of 1 day, they visited the residences of 7 affluent individuals, compelling them to issue checks, then holding them captive until daylight the following day. At this point, the team tasked with cashing the checks arrived. All the checks were successfully cashed by the detained individuals, who were then escorted to the banks to cash them. Prior to visiting the bank, each of these individuals was coerced into calling the bank and informing them that someone would arrive shortly to cash a check for a predetermined amount. The checks were cashed, and the team returned to their headquarters. Upon completion of the operation, each member walked away with a substantial and respectable sum of money. It stood as one of the most successful and unconventional robberies in John's history. However, a few months later, John and his gang attempted to rob a bank in Bellevue, Ohio. The plan failed, resulting in John's apprehension by the police. Prior to being transferred, he was detained at the police station adjacent to the bank. At 8:00 p.m., 3 uniformed individuals bearing a striking resemblance to members of the Central Police Department entered the station. Approaching the officer on duty, they asserted, "We are FBI investigators." Presenting their credentials, they stated, "We have been instructed to interrogate John Dillinger, following which he will be transferred to the county jail. The police station will collaborate with us on this assignment, as he will be transported in department vehicles." The officer readily complied with their instructions. Upon ushering John into the interrogation room and catching sight of the detectives, he was taken aback. He recognized these individuals as his comrades, not actual detectives. Upon realizing the plan, he cooperated with them. They subdued the officer, rendering him unconscious with an anesthetic, and escorted John out of the police station with handcuffs still secured. They put him in the car and drove off to their headquarters, as if nothing had happened. 5 days later, John resolved to return to the police station and seek revenge. He and all his men stormed the station, seizing large quantities of weapons and ammunition. In the ensuing clash with the police, one officer lost his life. Following this confrontation, John harbored no fear. He resolved to rob a bank every week, but in a more straightforward manner. He questioned the need for elaborate schemes, preferring instead to confront his adversaries head-on. However, his attempt at robbing a bank failed, leading to his apprehension along with 2 of his gang members. They were incarcerated in the county jail in Cowens Point, Indiana. John's trial was scheduled for 2 months after his arrest. During this period, he endured torture inflicted by vengeful police officers and fellow inmates acting on their behalf. Yet, a day before his trial, John executed a daring escape from the prison, employing tactics similar to those mentioned at the beginning of the narrative. Some sources allege that he brandished a makeshift wooden gun at a guard, coercing them to release him from his cell before overpowering others and making his escape. However, the initial story recounted remains the most credible, despite its peculiarities. Most accounts indicate that John vanished completely at this point, presumably attempting to flee the country or assume a new identity. Some sources suggest that he proposed to his gang members to abandon their criminal pursuits and lead respectable lives given their substantial wealth. However, the FBI had already initiated an intensive manhunt for him, deploying numerous investigators with the sole objective of capturing John. They set a deadline for his capture and offered a substantial reward for any information leading to his apprehension. Then, on July 18, 1934, a woman contacted the FBI. Identifying herself as Anna Sage, she claimed to possess detailed knowledge about John Dillinger and offered to facilitate his capture in exchange for specific conditions. She demanded $200,000 in cash and requested assistance in obtaining citizenship, as she was an immigrant from Romania without legal status. The Bureau of Investigation requested time to consider her terms. When Anna Sage called again the following day, the investigator informed her that they could only offer her an $800 bonus and assistance in securing legal immigration status. Reluctantly, Anna Sage agreed to these terms, admitting she had plans to accompany John to a movie in the coming days. With the promise of collateral, she pledged to assist the FBI in apprehending him. The agreement was settled, and on July 22, 1934, at 8 p.m., the FBI operatives positioned themselves at the designated location. They infiltrated the movie theater, blending in as workers and employees. Upon John's arrival, the officer overseeing the operation discreetly lit his cigarette, signaling to his fellow agents that their target was present. Sensing the danger, John swiftly drew his weapon, firing it into the air before bolting through the crowded theater. Despite his attempt to flee, a police officer managed to shoot him 5 times, ultimately bringing him down. John succumbed to his wounds, and the authorities officially declared his death at the age of 31 the following day. A gag order was imposed, prohibiting the dissemination of information about the incident. This measure was implemented due to the unusual nature of John's story and his peculiar status as a beloved figure among the populace. Remarkably, he provided monthly stipends to over 2,000 impoverished families, leading many to regard him as a heroic figure rather than a criminal. This concludes our narrative for today. If you found this story intriguing, feel free to share your thoughts on John Dillinger in the comments section.